Welcome to the Risk and Accounting Advisory Podcast. My name is Neil Began. I'm a principal and firm leader of Cherry Beckert's Risk Advisory practice. And today, on our first ever Risk and Review podcast series, we are going to dive into data and risk analytics and what it means for your organization. As if I didn't say risk enough, one more on the intro would be that joining me today is Sam Hallaby, Cherry Beckert's data and risk analytics leader. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here and happy to talk about risk and data and analytics. It's been a sweet spot for me for a long time.
Can't wait to unpack some of that. So real quick, let me just back up and introduce a little bit further the series that we are putting together. Again, the name of this series will be the Risk and Review series. It's going to be structured with 5 key questions around trending topics, and we will have our Cherry Beckert subject matter experts provide guidance on that topic's importance for faster and more effective decision making and connecting to your business operations and systems integration. So let's get things kicked off. Sam, the bar has been set, or at least you are going to set it here in the next 10 or so minutes. So let's talk about what is risk analytics. How does data and risk analytics increase value to certain client functions?
Well, risk and data, as you know, has been in our vernacular for a long time now. And it's a fairly broad topic, right? It is about, from using analytics to recommend your next movie you want to watch on Netflix, or placing your next trade, or increasing your market and product performance insights and all of that. And naturally, each one of these solutions where you apply analytics to comes with its own risk. So, for example, if Netflix gives you a flawed recommendation, what happens? You may have wasted an hour or two of your time. But if your trade analytics give you some investment advice that you act on, or your market insights are flawed, and the analytics there are costlier. So the way we look at it for our clients have a much simpler goal. We're not going to get into these complicated analytics. They're all just starting. So what we're trying to do to help them out is give them a kind of a right-sized approach application to solve some specific problems. And those problems for us, we want to keep them within the context of RAS. And those problems for our clients are more on risk recognition and how to take that risk and help mitigate any type of targeting that you have to perform. So the idea for us is to holistically help you identify risk and target mitigation. So what do? How do we approach it? We have a simple technique where we actually just curate data. We have a bunch of risk rules that we learn from our experiences, and we have them codified in a library. And we help articulate all of that through some visual perspectives and presentations to kind of tell the story, right? It's not about just putting tabular data on a piece of paper. It's about business intelligence. It's about where are the patterns and how do we recognize the patterns?
That's fantastic. So let's dig in a little bit more on that. How does Cherry Beckert apply the data and risk analytics for our clients specifically?
Well, typically, given our client base and given our client profile, a lot of it these days has been a bit of more requests and saying, look, we want to be able to increase our internal audit wants to be able to increase test coverage, right? Right now we do sampling. We have thousands of transactions. We sample 60 transactions. That's not going to tell us much. We're digitized, or we're halfway digitized, or we're on a digital journey. Well, just having that means that we can get to 100% test coverage if they are digitized, right? So once you do that, you're also elevating the confidence in the outcome of an audit or a report. So we have customers asking us to audit their reports. Are we, what is being reported how does it correlate to the data that constructs it, right? So we have been able to help a lot of our clients with that. What else can we do? Right now, we can monitor internal controls so that we make sure they're effective and we don't have to wait from periodic exam to periodic exam. We can do it periodically now on a higher frequency. We can do it weekly. We can do it monthly. And it all depends on the maturity of the client's ability to get certain data points for us. What else can we do? We can learn about transactions. We've done a lot of work in the payout place, in the procure to pay environment, where we can look at masses of rows of data and try to kind of learn from it, identify patterns, who's spending more, who's spending less. And I'll get into that a little later with some examples. What else can we do? We have entities, regulatory entities, say the IRS or Department of Labor, that's basically levying a penalty on you for some missed payments, some missed deposits. Well, we're able to use analytics to also help shadow those calculations so that you can see if what the IRS or what the Department of Labor is saying to you is actually proper. You can shadow their calculations. Their calculations are open. They are posted on their website, so we can take that, codify it, and present it, apply it to the transactions that could be a period of time of transactions, and we can calculate that. So gives you a better ability to also respond to your regulator with a lot more confidence than trying to acquiesce to a lot of their concerns.
All great points, and certainly the advent of and really the increase in the use of data and analytics in both internal audit functions and really the auditing world as a whole has certainly been significant over the years. But oftentimes changes are associated with cost, right? And so wanted to touch on that today. What kind of overhead and costs are associated with integrating data and risk analytics into those functions that you mentioned?
That's a great question. That's like when you go out to buy a car. You can buy a car for $10,000 or you can buy a car for $100,000. Ultimately, it's like, where do you find that? Where do you strike that balance? Our approach helps our clients in finding that balance. So the way we approach it is it's a shared effort with the client. We can bring the methodologies, we can bring the industry insights, and the client brings their institutional knowledge, right? The client best knows about their environment. So what do? Having all these three column competencies, if you will, converged, we're able to look at the client's need. We're able to look at the resource availability. Do they have something called? We like to start with something called an analytics sandbox. You got to have a sandbox, right? The sandbox constitutes certain tools and certain skill sets that kind of converge and let you kind of play and try to figure out, because there's a lot of experimentation in analytics, and that's where an investment has to happen. So we focus to build an analytics toolbox. It can be expensive if you go out and buy Snowflake or buy all these highly expensive tools that our clients really at the level of volumes that they have don't really need. So we stick to more open source applications like Python or SQL or R or Tableau and Alteryx. These tools are available, and not just available. There's a lot of skill sets out there that can help you manage those in the future, right? You're not tied into 3 or 4 developers that can only do these things. These are kind of prolific. A lot of people are out there. There's a lot of support for them. There's an online community. So it helps developers who are going to operate, practitioner in those tools, operate those tools, really quickly get up to speed and learn. So we like to have that sandbox for our clients. We create the use case. The use case has to be focused on a specific solution. We don't want to try to solve every possible problem. We start with a small engine that supports a specific use case, and then from there we can build along and iterate through it. Kind of, think of it as an agile methodology of iteration, quick iterations to build it out. Once we get to kind of what we call a proof of concept, and it's delivered, what we do is this: we want to make it sticky with the client, right? We don't want to go and say, okay, well, you got a proof of concept now, let's go ahead and operationalize it. No, now is work with it, tune it, make adjustments as you need, build a framework for trying to manage it and sustain it along the way. And then we discuss various methods of productionalizing it. It can be something on premises. That means they can totally operate this on their own if they have the right skill sets. It can be managed service, something that Cherry Becker can do for them. It can be a hosted service, which is something that Cherry Becker, or they can host it with Amazon or Microsoft. or it could be a hybrid. So there's a lot of options at that point where how you can proceed in operationalize and productionalizing any one of those solutions.
Always good to have options. So let's kind of unpack one of those, or more if you want, but at least one while we're on this podcast. Can you provide a quick success story on how we've helped clients implement integrated risk analytics strategies to streamline operations and help with better or maybe even more accurate decision making?
Absolutely, Neil. And it's really interesting. We've seen coming out of this pandemic, we've seen, it was a spike to organizations, right? It was a lot of new volumes that were that were there that came in and emerged that weren't there before. For example, I'll take putting everybody at home, right? Everybody had to work remote. So what does that mean? That means now a lot of folks at home had to purchase more things. They had a lot more requests for spending. The vendors submitting invoices were still mailing things in, and then because that's what we told them to do in the past, mail things in. Now they had to scan it and email. So a lot of things changed, and and a lot of nuances and idiosyncrasies kind of came out with that, because this is something we all weren't used to. So one thing we saw is the increase of the issuance of corporate cards by organizations. And, 2 years of pandemic, now internal audit is trying to catch up, trying to see how people were spending, what were they buying, who were they buying from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now they are seeing, millions of transactions. I mean, how is internal audit going to shine a light and try to figure out where to look? You can't do the traditional sampling, take 50 random transactions or 100 random transactions and try to test them and follow through. You can't do that. So what we've introduced to them is something that we provided a tool. We said, look, we're going to give you a tool. We're just going to take all these spending transactions, whether they're corporate cards, whether they're vendor payments, whether expense reimbursements, whether they are any type of payout that happened. And we're going to kind of layer it, and we're going to slice it, and we're going to be able to empirically look at it and analyze it and discover habits. We're going to discover habits where, and benchmarks, right? We're going to discover things like, what is the average spend for a particular function, right? And on top of that, who should be spending? Are people using their corporate card? We blindly gave corporate cards to everybody during the pandemic. Are people using them? Because the risk of having active corporate cards where people aren't using them is high. So you want to make sure if you're not using something, you take it away, right? So immediately, once we kind of layered the data, immediately we're able to see spends that are out of the norm. Things like where your average spend is, let's say, $2,000 holistically across the organization. And I'll get to the holistically in a bit. Holistically across our organization, we are seeing spends of $40,000 per transaction, right? So immediately, a visual is out there, which lets the eyeballs go and say, wow, this is not normal. Let me look at that. Let me shine a light on that. Let me drill down on that, and let me see what was happening. And that's how we've been, providing these tools to internal audit. Now, when I say holistically, is because, V1 of doing something like this is looking at an organization as a whole. So if you are, let's say, some government entity, say a county or a municipality or something like that, the average spend for folks cleaning the streets after the snowstorm is very different than the folks cleaning the folks in the police department or the fire department or the teachers or the education system, all of that. So all of that also then over time you start taking into consideration, and you learn how to delineate what the police department's average normal looks like, or some people call it what does good look like, and we basically see what falls outside of the good the good spectrums, the thresholds, and we go from there. So then basically we the idea is that internal audit will learn, iterate through it, and all of that, and we'll get to that towards the end, Neil, on how to sustain things once you go into the journey of analytics.
Right. Yep. So let's stay with that journey. And I promised the folks at the top of the podcast that we'd limit it to 5. I'd like to ask a bunch more questions, but for purposes of today, we will stay with the 5. So I guess my last question, you just alluded to, let's discuss how we put all of this into motion. So if I'm sitting here listening to this podcast, ideally I'm thinking to myself, where does the data and risk analytics journey start, and ultimately where can it go?
Well, the way we've done this is we've worked, like I said earlier, we work hand in hand with the client. This is not something, we say, here you go, here's a solution, we're going to just stick it on your desk and start running with it. We work hand in hand so that the knowledge transition is continuous, right? So that by the time we're done, they're able to operate on their own. They can be a standalone mode. The idea, once you fill out, we fill out that proof of concept. We coalesce alongside of it. We iterate through it. We see what's working, what's not working. So that's kind of what we call a data science approach. And we want to improve these over time, right? Because right now, the first thing that our customers can do is do these what we call simple lookbacks. And these lookbacks tell you, what is happening and why it's happening, right? But ultimately, you can move into the complexity of being forward-looking to say what's likely to happen and what to do next, right? So this is where the journey begins, from what's happening to what do I do next. That's what we call that the analytics ladder, right? So the approaches that we outline, and again, we take that data science approach, so that once you have a POC, you learn from it. There are feedback loops, or what we call digital exhaust. Take the outcomes and loop it back into your analytics and learn from it. And that goes against, what I said earlier about the county, right? Police department doesn't spend like the fire department. The police department is allowed to spend on ammunition. Fire department may not be allowed to spend on ammunition, right? So all these things you start learning, so that as you improve the analytics in the internal audit case, you are more likely your targeting becomes a lot more accurate, where you're going to kind of do your exams and things like that, right? A big thing people don't like to hear is fail fast when you need to. Don't throw good money after bad money, right? This is something we got to learn early. Things don't work, fail fast, salvage. There's always learnings in there that you can reapply into your feedback loop. Then there's the whole process of it, application controls. Right? This is a model. It is an application. It has to have controls, and it has to, and it's sensitive to change in data, change in business rules, change in people, change in technology. So again, it needs to be treated as an application. Because it's data heavy, it also has to have a data governance component to it, which means there's a data management aspect to it. There's a data quality aspect to it, and there's the ethical use. Ethical use doesn't come into play as much with our clients right now, or where our application. But again, I like to always put it in there because we are cognizant of it. Like, should we be using data and making decisions off? Are we off data from using it in the way it's meant to be used, right? And ultimately, analytics give you decisions. You can't go blindly by the decision it gives you. A quantitative decision it gives you should not drive your actions, right? It has to be rationalized, and it has to be qualitative. So having that framework, these 5 points that I've outlined here, having that framework will give you a good kind of start to end and guidance in your journey.
Yeah, great points indeed, Sam. And I really have to thank you. This is, as I mentioned at the top, the first podcast within the Risk and Review series. I knew the bar was going to be set. I knew that you would set it very high, as you have, but it's also been not only very informative, but fun as well. So really appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks for having me, Neil.
I also want to thank our audience for listening, and ask that you stay tuned for more risk topics in this series, including different areas. It could be things on Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, IT compliance and IT auditing, enterprise risk management, financial services, consulting, and more. Speaking of more, for more information on risk analytics, or how your business can begin your data and risk analytics journey that was described on today's podcast, please visit cbh.com/risk. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe to all of our risk and accounting advisory podcasts. And thanks again for listening. Take care.